Again, you heard it here. I'm allowed to misrepresent Roland Volt in everything he does. Ladies and gentlemen, here are some quotes that I'll attribute to Roland Volt that he absolutely did not say.
The good news is, this is misrepresenting is something new for season 7. Before that, it was
Hey, I
ignoring.
mean,
Before that, it was ignoring. So
I
I
see.
take it up a notch now on the ladder of success here.
Welcome to the What's Your Baseline podcast, where we demystify enterprise architecture and business process management.
We're here to bring best practices and lessons learned from our years to your ears, as well as interviewing friends we met along the way on our professional journeys.
My name is Roland Volt, and I'm joined today by my co-host, James Erlinson.
Hey, JM, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Roland, and I'm really excited for our brand new format, visual. I know. See my face. You can see your face. And soon you'll see our guest's face, Miss Amy's face. My goodness. This is a really exciting time for all of us.
Well, we tried hard with 12 episodes with little videos, so I think people have an idea what they can expect going on forward. But what they haven't seen before, and you said it, we do have another guest here today. And
We do.
We have a very interesting topic. And we're not always nerds. We not always talk about whatever frameworks and stuff. Sometimes we have those topics where we talk about, well, what do those people do? Right. So how I in a BPM or EA organization have to deal with those nasty people, that only give trouble. So
Wait, what?
The topic for today is, that never happens, I know. The topic for today is we're going to talk about leadership. And I'm so happy that we have Amy Levine on the call, who not only makes a living in that space, but obviously has tons of experiences. And she brings, without spoiling too much, she brings a different angle to this. And it's scary for some folks. It's science-based. So welcome, Amy, to the show.
Hooray!
Hey guys, I'm happy to be here in your new format, though I do appreciate a non-video. It is engaging to see people. So, hey everyone.
It is absolutely too late for those complaints, Amy. You're in it, you have to go with the flow now.
I know better than to complain to you, Roland. I've only known you for here now a month, and I know what we're working with.
So, Amy,
unfortunately, we had to go with a science-based approach, Roland. That's the thing that kills us, is we got to do science. And of course, the science says that people engage better with visual media. That's just the way it is. And frankly, I like that.
It's because we're a predatory species. We like moving things, and that grabs our attention. But having said that, Amy, let's talk a little bit about you. How about that as a starter, so that our listeners or watchers can get an idea of who you are and what your background is? Can you enlighten us a little bit?
Sure. Hello. Thank you for having me. I appreciate being here, first of all. And it's just so nice to see you both and to be chatting. I have worked for myself for the last 6 years as a business consultant, really working with leaders on how to leverage the brain as a tool. And I could easily become a recluse in my house alone. So it's always good to see people's faces. I have studied neuro leadership for well over a decade. I worked in Fortune 100s and startups alike, really driving organizational change through the science of how the brain works. And I'm sure we'll get into a lot of it, but I've worked with tons and tons of folks that do not want to change or are resistant to it, but really do need new behaviors to be more profitable in their company or just do things differently. So I'm happy to be here.
And we're excited to have you, Amy. And particularly when we take a look at this as a science-based approach, right? We're trying to understand the secret behind how this works, because there are so many folks out there. And I'm sure if you're on the line, you've heard from consultants, you've heard from best practice organizations, you've watched YouTube videos. There's so much advice out there. But what you're looking for isn't just somebody's opinion. You're looking for the consensus or the consolidated knowledge that's come through research and experience that has an evidence-based backing something that you can actually act upon. And Amy, I think that the first question we would have about that is, tell us how you got to the point of evidence-based thinking on this. What experiences brought you there? What sort of trainings did you have to go through? How did you cultivate that knowledge within yourself?
Sure, happy to. My career started in a Fortune 100. I was in a global productivity team. So our job was to make our sellers more productive. And I was training 3,500 system engineers. So I've always worked within the technical folks. I do consider myself a nerd, Roland, and it's just a different type of nerd. But I really needed to get these folks to be more productive, sell more, lead the technical sale to drive more profit for this organization. And in that 8 years that I was at this company, it was very obvious that my audience was technical and they really liked science-backed information. I was educated in organizational design, but I really needed to dig right into figuring out how I can make them do more, be more productive. And so I started studying how to coach people based off of brain science. I took it upon myself on how to influence people without authority, and just a lot of education to make sure I understood this particular avatar of a person. And it led to success in the organization, success for myself in the organization. And when they incubated a startup, they asked me to head the practice at this startup. And so I did it then at a company-wide size, and it got a little bit bifurcated because I didn't just have technical folks. I also had our sales folks and our engineers and our marketing teams. And my education continued because I needed to really understand systematically how the brain worked, not just for a technical person, but how am I going to leverage the skills differently depending on the personality of the person that we're trying to make more productive. My role has always been high performance culture. How do we build this high performance culture with shared values, shared community, a common objective so that we know where the goal is? And that has been a phenomenal opportunity for me. A lot of learnings, a lot of failures, a lot of curmudgeons, as we'll discuss, because most people are resistant to doing something a certain way. If you bring the data and you bring the science, they are a little less resistant. And that's where we worked in some of these large company-wide programs that significantly changed the performance of these organizations.
I love when you say it's a little less resistant. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's a tiny little
less
bit.
resistant, I mean, because
Yeah.
that's what you have to get to. I mean, I'll give you an example. You walk into an organization working with whatever divisional head you have as a mid-20-year-old, as I was, and I was like, we're going to do this to change how our folks sell, the cycle of selling, right? And the leaders would just look at me like, no, we do it this industrial way. We've done it this way since I've been here, and that's the way it's going to be done. And I would just have to leverage coaching and what I've learned as a coach to say, would it be possible that maybe we get different results if we did something differently? And allowing them to take the lead on the idea versus you coming in with the idea allows them to have a little bit more autonomy in the decision and partner with you better as well.
And well, your nickname is the corporate whisperer, as I heard. So, but the point is,
Love that.
You're welcome. It's how do I say that now? The question that I see is, what is the problem? When I think about our audience, a little bit nerdy, little bit esoteric topic, maybe not very well accepted in their organizations, like, oh, why do we have to do this again, and all that type of stuff. Then you have that situation that you will become a leader, right? So you might be happy in your nerdom and happy in what you do, but then immediately you get plugged in and says, oh, by the way, lead this project, lead this team, right? Take over the whole group, right? With all that stuff that you haven't have done before. So when I see that situation, and then a couple of minutes ago, we spoke about high performance teams, right? I definitely can see a line between them, but it would be great if you could elaborate a little bit, because as you know from our prep call, I worked in an organization where everything was best clients, best people, high performance, delivered, la, 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 la. So I'm a little bit skeptical about that, but maybe you can enlighten me a little bit, and especially those persons that I just described, who get new into a leading role, what that actually means, right? Not just from buzzwords, but from a day-to-day, how does a day in a life feel for people working in high performance teams versus maybe not so high performing teams?
Let's give an example for folks that probably are going to be listening to this call and very similar folks that I've worked with. So we have practice leaders or leaders of a division that are new to the role, and they're new to the role. And honestly, there's not much leadership development in a lot of organizations. So what that looks like is, hey, you have this goal. Now you have these 4 folks that directly are going to working with you, or you just have to work collectively to hit this particular goal. And as the quote unquote leader, which I will say going forward, when I say leader, I think that is a personality. I don't think that you need to be a leader of people to be a leader. And so I will use that word going forward as such. But this new leadership role that you're in, you either have to fix something, build something, improve something, because this is now the position that you're in. And oftentimes in the environment that we're in these days, we have to do more with less. We have less people, or we're very concerned about potential layoffs. We've just gone through a merger and acquisition. And I work with this person who has a new assignment to help them navigate that with a little bit more effectiveness and a little bit more efficiency. And I say a little bit more because it's just incremental, like compounded growth over time. But the way that we're going to try to work is in a systems design perspective, which a lot of your folks on this podcast will understand because they will work in design thinking. And the goal is, how do we leverage them and the other people more effectively to do the job at hand? And that goes back to this quote about high performance, because one of the key things that we have to do is make sure that we're all communicating effectively and know, but what is that common objective? It sounds subtle. I think it sounds stupid, but a lot of times ourselves as a leader, we are not communicating what that common objective is to our entire organizational department that's working on this and the stakeholders, to then say, here's the big goal, here are the sub goals, here's what you need to do. Can we work on it? And you, coming from your consulting organization for multiple years, you understand that. What I know is I understand that too, but not everyone has that perspective or life knowledge. So what do we have to do coming in? Really know that there's a communication so that everyone has the same message that we're trying to work towards. That's foundational. It might sound stupid. We can kind of go through that quickly if you'd like, but that's not a foundational space that you can miss.
I'm just curious how this feels, because yes, I get we all need to be a high performance team. Everybody needs to be on the same page, right? And you need to know, okay, this is where the goal is. We're going to march up that hill and not down the valley and have a bath in the river, right? I get that. I think there's a couple of other criteria that come into such an organization. And as much as I just dissed that previous organization that I worked in for almost 7 years, There was one characteristic that I really, really, really liked. And that might be because they selected a certain type of people. It might be the brainwash, right, that everybody got. But there was a very, very healthy competition, not in the sense of like it's one pie, and if I take this slice of the pie, then you don't get it. But it was more than a zero sum game. It was like, oh, everybody tries to do the best that they can, and look, I did better than you. It was that sportsman-like competition there. If you're whatever a high jumper, well, I beat you by 2 inches, haha. And that also brought in a certain form, and that might be the second characteristic that I saw. It's like a certain form of play, right? Because if you do sports, it's because you like to do the activity. It's not. Well, I hope not. It's not because you just look at the scoreboard and hopefully have the highest score at the end of the day. What does a high performance organization in your mind then look like? Which other characteristics have you seen of one of those high performance organizations? And we will talk in the second part of the show, obviously, about how to get there.
So you hit on something that we've heard of in the last 10 years or so about gamification. How do you create kind of this contest with folks? Let's take a step up from that. So I've studied the brain to really understand how to influence folks to make more high performing teams. And you've given a good example, but to back into it, we have chemicals in our brain that are going to impact us in ways that are going to help drive our behaviors and performance, our emotions. And there are these tiny molecules that really do have a way that we can leverage them. So I'm speaking about something that's called neurotransmitters. That's the technical term for them, but they're just like tiny little molecules with huge influence. And if we leverage those, and this is how I coach folks and really work with my leadership, if we can leverage these neurotransmitters, we can actually scientifically change into more of a high performing culture. And the one that you are leading with is some neurotransmitter, one of the big four, called dopamine. And we know dopamine. We talk about dopamine a lot from like a detox, being on our phones too much and not wanting to be addicted to dopamine. But I think that there's something specific in dopamine that you're getting to, which is the good part of it, because it's the gamification of dopamine and like how we can really get into our brains and leveraging it. So maybe we want to talk about that for a few minutes.
It's a little warm and fuzzy. You have your checklist of things to do, and you check off another item that gives you that little boost. Like, ooh, great, yes.
Well, I want to talk about dopamine a little bit more when we get into the actual sort of how do you influence this, right? So what components are you going to change? One thing, the last thing I wanted to ask before we do take a brief break and we get from the why to the how is something more fundamental. We talk about high performing teams like it's a given that a high performing team will lead to better business outcomes. But that's not connected, right? That's just a decoupled set of statements because we assume high performance in a team results in better, like specifically better like output. But tell me a little bit more about what an organization that's aligned with leaders across the organization focusing on the characteristics of high performance. What does that do for the business? And what is our ultimate goal that we see from adopting this perspective, this approach to managing teams, managing excellence?
Outcomes that you have by creating this type of culture. I work with folks for two big reasons. They have talent they want to retain. So they want to make this group of individuals stay longer at the organization because they're good. They want to help them be great, or they're great and they want to be excellent. That is a massive reason that I work with some leadership. And the second one is they are not getting done what they need to accomplish. And that might be an organizational thing versus a person thing. We don't have the right skills in the team right now. So then Amy's brought in as the organizational designer to really make shop and just the simple tweaks, right? But those are the two big things when you're talking about outcomes for high performance, of where my leadership are saying, these are the pain points for me. We now have 4 people instead of 8. I don't have budget to get more folks. I don't want to lose these folks. How do I leverage them better? We can work that, right? Or how do I really make sure that we're all figuring out how to get a common goal? That's not my strong suit as a leader. I know how to build this particular thing or lead this particular program. I need somebody with that organizational psychology. So those are the big things that I come in with. There's also this concept that we brought up. Leadership doesn't get training. So you become a new leader, again, leadership in quotes, and there's not a playbook that the company usually gifts you to say, read this, here's what you're going to need to do. It's great. Go hit your quota, hit the product design deadlines, figure it out without any education around it. So oftentimes we need a coach to be able to help us.
Well, that makes a lot of sense for me. And I want to take a moment for us to break between the why and the how. I hear the why, right? Aligning our values, common objectives, innovative problem solving, good communication, good collaboration, achieving goals we can't get to, equipping our people, keeping our people. It makes a lot of sense. So let's turn to you, our audience. Do you think you're in a high-performing team? Why or why not? And if you are or aren't, how is the leader you have influencing this? Are they helping to encourage high performance through the wholesome and valuable means we've talked about already, and we will talk about soon? Or perhaps are they hindering your move towards high performing as a culture? We'll leave you for a moment and come back with our second section with our friend Amy, the how.
Love won't let you down, won't let you down. Yeah, hey, I need your love, won't let you down. Hey, I need your love, won't let you down.
And welcome back. Amy, this is an awesome conversation. So first feedback, because I want you to have some neurotransmitters flowing now, because we're going to talk about that in this second half of the show. But maybe if we could take a step back, because you teased us a little bit in the first half. Why should I care? I, as an individual in the architecture group, or as the leader, be it the leader formally or informally, why should I care? What is the reason of this from your perspective?
Would you like to do things differently?
Depends. If the stuff that I'm doing work, why should I change?
Is it working?
Well, of course. Yes. If it doesn't work, of course.
Oh, I'm glad. Okay. Well, could it get any better?
It always can get better. Can't it?
So a lot of times that's kind of the dialogue that I'll have with folks. I work with a lot of technical leaders that are really great at what they do, and they've had really good results. And I'm coming in at a time because they want better results. They're still resistant, but they're looking for some maybe quick fixes. And I make it very known that there's not a quick fix in behavior change. We're really looking at this like a venture capitalist would, year over year growth. We do look for leading indicators, as we're all aware of, so that we're going to see the results that we want. But we will come at it from a realization that what we're doing has a lot of pros, Perhaps there's some cons, and we're going to try to leverage the brain cognition, understanding things that might be a little bit more biological, people focused, to change the behaviors and ultimately hopefully have better leading indicators. Okay.
That's good for me.
Interesting.
So then, as a question back to you, then, Amy, you teased us with the idea of the dopamine results. Like, how do we see that as a possibility for motivation? We've spoken about these 4 neurotransmitters. First, give us a clinic on what they are, and then let's talk about how the leadership approach understands and leverages that knowledge to do something different.
Dopamine. We've talked about this a couple times. A lot of folks will know the layman's terms, and I won't get very scientific here. We can nerd out on neuroscience later, but dopamine is this brain's reward system. And we leverage that in corporate based on goals and having this kind of systematic culture of learning, because if we are continually learning, our brain actually sends out these hits of dopamine to feel like we're doing better. When you're talking performance management, dopamine is going to be your go-to. So if you want folks to be feeling better and doing better, you're going to want to activate a surge of this. And Roland talked about it earlier. Sometimes what we do is create these games and contests between peers so that we have some like fun and it's an exciting thing. But what I would say as an example that a lot of leaders don't do as much as they could because they know so much of what they're trying to get to is really encourage autonomy. So when you're trying to promote more boosts of dopamine as a leader, I recommend that you encourage autonomy for decision making from those folks that you're working with. Define the perimeters of what you're looking for, and then let them be creative and really see where that gets them. Do not dismiss their ideas. Oftentimes, we might think we know it because we've done that thing before and we've not gotten the results. I just want you as a leader to pause, let them speak their mind, let them be creative in their pursuit, and see where it gets to.
I love that. And the autonomy is ownership, right? That's the idea, is you can, with autonomy under your belt, the things you create you feel invested in, right? And you can feel more proud of. This is not somebody else's like creation lived out through your body, rather something that you've conceptualized or you've realized. I like that a lot. And this activates, you're saying, this neurotransmitter specifically or more intensely.
Yes. Autonomy, the encouragement of autonomy is going to activate dopamine. And we're getting very granular here, of course, but because you're going to have this reward if what you provide as a creative option comes to fruition, or even just your ability to work on it, you have a surge of dopamine. And I have many examples that I can speak of like how we do that systematically within an organization. But I will tell you just a huge one that we all know. There's a company, WebEx. We used it 15 years ago. And one of the leaders in that organization had a novel idea for a phone-friendly platform. And they did not take this person up on the autonomous idea. And that person left and ended up creating a rival, a mega rival perhaps, of Zoom. And that's a very jazzy example. But even in work that I do, if you want to bring it down to a practice lead, you have 5 people on your team. what I will often do as I come in as a consultant, when I speak to every individual person, I will understand what their job description is. What do they need to do? And then we'll spend time on asking them, if you had 10 to 20% of time, what would you want to do? And then I work with the leader to really carve out time for each of those individuals to do that thing that they want to do, allow them to try it out. They obviously have to get all of their work done, but doing that provides this surge of motivation because they get to have an idea come to fruition that might be as good as building a platform called Zoom.
And I'm not sure if it fits here or if it fits later. So if it fits later, just let me know. But you're describing a positive scenario, positive outcome. I've worked in organizations where the managers were goddamn micromanagers. No trust. Show me what you've done. Oh yeah, I just work with idiots. Whatever, right? Whatever the symptoms are, right? How do you approach this? Because to say, oh, by the way, you need to give your people more freedom, obviously doesn't work, because if you don't trust your people, why should you give them even more freedom? Right? Quite the opposite. Twist the thumb screws, right? Or how do they say, the beating won't stop until morale improves. So is that a part of the 4 dopamine things that you have? And does that person have a dopamine deficit, or how would you assess that situation?
That person has a deficit, that is for sure. They are not able to get out of their own way. And that's what I see a lot with leaders. It's a normal thing. They've come into this particular power because they were good at something, and then they do not delegate enough because of trust. And it's generally a self-trust, honestly, because they fear, and we'll get to this next neurotransmitter out of this, the leader fears what will happen if their team ends up doing the work that they are doing. And so they hold a lot of the work, not even wanting it, but not feeling the trust, because if they get it, then what happens to my job? So let's go into this feeling of like, we need to reduce the feeling of stress and anxiety and just overall fear in the workplace. And that goes with a neurotransmitter, cortisol. And we hear about cortisol a lot of times. If you have high levels of cortisol, you have stress. Yes, of course, there are good reasons that we have cortisol. Of course, it's a reaction that will prevent us from some negative things biologically. I mean, we're talking if we were getting attacked by a bear, what would happen, right? But then in the workplace, what this looks like is really promoting a workplace where your leader is going to be leading by example and fostering what we call psychological safety, which is a term of just feeling like you can use your voice in the workplace and not be reprimanded for it or bad consequences happening. But that is going to stem from the leader leading with a little bit more delegation, a little bit less of the hold. And that takes a lot of time. In my practice, I work directly with a leader in an accelerated program for the first phase so that we really develop a trust, so that when we go into the team, we know that the leader is willing to change, so that then the folks that they are working with will be able to change. I don't work with leaders that don't have that desire for that outcome. But if you talk about, let's say, working a healthy balance of work life, as the leader, I know that I'm spending 18 hours. My team might feel like they're doing a lot of work or work that they don't like to do. And you want to redelegate the work. And so we try to workshop what can actually be given out to the teams. And as we discussed, there could be 10 to 20% of something that your folks on your team want to be able to do. and you're just not handing that over to them yet, or you've just not known yet because you've not asked the questions. And that is a fear from the leader to give up the work. So that's a big part of their cortisol levels and how that's going to impact their organization.
I have a question along, and I want you to validate this or to shoot it down, and tell me how it works out, which is all about fear in the workplace. I feel like there is sometimes this perception from leadership, at least some of the folks I've spoken to, that fear is an important part of their effective use of control, right?
Mhm.
They need fear. They feel like fear almost more than reward is a motivator. If you're losing your job, or fear of losing face and reputation,
Mhm.
the fear of becoming irrelevant. How much do you see fear and the cortisol, like using that on purpose to increase cortisol levels, resulting in better performance by teams or worse performance by teams?
There's a lot of research in this. It also changes by generation, even back to the dopamine gamification of things. Some would argue that that's more fear-based. If you don't see yourself and the number one seed in the top 10 list, what does that do to you? You might be concerned about your work or the livelihood of you working there, and it does perhaps motivate you. It goes into motivation. You can use fear as a motivator. We see that in society. Fear actually has a stronger hold for change than the other side. But I have seen more sustainable effect when you're not using the overabundance of fear and you're actually using more of what I'll call psychological safety, this trust in your team where you are able to leverage that fear more publicly. And then it's turned because you still have the fear, but you're actually just able to vocalize it more.
And I see that one of the neurotransmitters we haven't talked about yet does have the word trust in. So we've heard about dopamine, cortisol. Talk to me about oxytocin.
Oh, okay. So oxytocin is another neurotransmitter that we've probably heard of before. It's like the love drug. You're always feeling very connected. I think it can also be the cuddle drug or the cuddle neurotransmitter. But speaking about this in the workplace specifically, if you want to foster a community that is highly productive, you really want a collaborative space where folks feel connected to their team and recognized for their work. So a lot of times for leaders, when you're talking about oxytocin and promoting that, something that you can do very simply, which is not done very often, still simple, not done, but very effective for retaining your talent and having your talent work harder, stronger, is just embracing recognition. So if you can acknowledge achievements, even humbled failures that didn't work, but things that we learned out of it, and have a systematic way of every Friday sending a note out to the team on things that you've learned and who's been sharing that knowledge, it is one of the tactics that I have found that gives the massive gains of connection and fostering that type of collaboration and reward. People are working because they have to most of the time, but when they get recognized and feel seen for things that they're doing, whether it was a massive success or not, there's learnings, they are going to feel more connected to the purpose of their team and what they're working on.
So we have joy, fear, connection. What is the last one of the four?
So serotonin is going to be the fourth one. There's so many more that we could talk about, but serotonin is similar, where this is like the feel good neurotransmitter. things of your overall mood. So we know serotonin because a lot of antidepressants have a serotonin element to it. So when people take these drugs, they're inducing more of the mood booster. And similarly to cortisol, this is an opportunity for you to do maybe subtle things, but really effective of flexibility. We now work in a work from home hybrid system, but recognizing where your folks have, if they're not clocking in and clocking out and they have a big goal, note that maybe they can take an hour midday to pick up the kids from school. We see this a lot more now, but these types of ways to manage their day-to-day stress is going to boost their serotonin.
I see these four. This is fantastic. We have serotonin, dopamine, oxytocin, and cortisol. Those are, and I've heard how you can maybe affect each one by the choices you make as a leader. So now let's talk about applying this in an organization. And particularly, I'm thinking about the advice you have on how you consider that when you move from a player coach to an organizational leader. You mentioned before these people who are good at their jobs, and then they get the job of managing people who are doing that job without a handbook. And so their skills are not as a leader or manager necessarily, they're as an individual contributor. And we see so many of those. I have a family member who was promoted from a coder to a manager of a coding team. And guess what? There is no manual on how to manage a coding team. So what did he do? More coding, right? But that doesn't actually foster the high performing team that they wanted. And in fact, he actually decided to leave the job because he got promoted. So talk about how you can change how you approach your job, moving from a player coach to an organizational leader, and apply this as a learning structure for organizational change and leadership styles change to achieve this high performance you're looking for.
The folks that I've worked with in new leadership positions, whether they be a sales leader that has not had that before, or they're now leading a practice or division, the same thing applies where they don't have constructive tools at their disposal. There's a lot of books, but not from a corporate perspective. There's very lacking leadership training. One thing that I do recommend for any leader, even if you know all the people in the organization, is spend time connecting with each of the folks on the team. That is going to be your focus for the 30 days. And you are obviously going to have other outcomes that you're going to need to do. There's not a 24-hour day, time zone. There's so much more to being a leader than just getting your work done. So you have to find the time to really understand the individual people. Because Roland, what you said at the beginning is like, this person thought of me as a great leader and this person didn't, but I was doing the same thing. But the point for you to lead is really to understand the personalities of your individual people on your team and how you do have to manage them differently, which is a lot of psychology. So getting to know folks, inviting them into what you need to share with them, being a little bit more vulnerable. This is not easy for the traditional technical person that I work with. So a lot of times they do need some push to be a little bit more open. But even if you're just being systematic and saying, here are the goals that we need to do, here's what we're working on, what are the parts that you find that you are really strong at? What would you like to lean in on? Tell me more of what you want to do. Providing that conversation in your first few days, first few weeks of this role are going to impact the development of this culture, because you have to do things different. You're put into this position to get different results.
And maybe just to want to put a bow around it, I think people need to realize that their job has significantly changed. When you think about JM's example, the coder who just does more coding, well, that person failed, but your job now is to build a team of coders, right? It's not to create the artifact, the code. This is why you have coders in your team, right? So I think making that realization that you still do stuff that's fun, like the one-on-ones that you recommend, right? And getting to know your people. That is actual work, right? And I think you need to have that realization to say, oh, the characteristics of my job have changed. It's
Yeah.
not just that I'm the head coder now.
I recommend to folks that are new into this role to start the conversation and just be asking upfront questions of like, I am at my best when.
Mhm.
Allow them to answer that. I am at my worst when. You can count on me to do what? What I need from you is you bringing that to the table as a leader and sharing that stuff first, and then asking for it from the individuals will develop this nurtured relationship that might feel funny because you've not done it. But I work with so many Rolands, so many folks that are comfortable doing what they've done. If you do it a little bit different, we'll have data points to measure the success of it. But if we don't do it differently, we're not going to be able to do anything different. So I'm at my best when, I'm at my worst when. You can count on me to do this. And what I need from you is this. Show up to them. Lead by example, because this is how you want to present, and recognize that energy begets energy. And it is not rocket science. It is neuroscience, and it does take time, but it does come to fruition.
I love that. It is neuroscience. And I want to ask our audience about neuroscience. How do they lead? So consider yourselves, if you're a leader right now, or if you have a leadership style in some capacity in your life, how do you lead? What neurotransmitters were you aware of? And based on what they do, how are you affecting the neurotransmitters in yourself and your team? If you're a new leader, how are you growing into that role? Have you been asking these kinds of questions of, I'm at my best and I'm at my worst when? And what are you going to do to change how you approach your science of leadership? We'll come back with our final thoughts and conclusions for the episode.
I won't come, something coming over. I won't come like something coming over me. I won't come like something coming over me. I won't come like something coming over me. Something coming over. Give me the 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 cause
And welcome back. So, Amy, this was a fascinating conversation. And I honestly have to say, I have learned something. I've never thought about, okay, there's
Finally.
different. Finally, it took 73 episodes until Ronan learned something. I thank you, JM, for keeping me on track here. But the ultimate question that I have is obviously, well, how do I learn more about what Amy does? Because these episodes are just a little teaser, right? And the other question that I have is, well, how can I get in contact with Amy, right? To talk about the situation that I have, or maybe just have a virtual cup of coffee.
I love a virtual cup of coffee. If you want to learn more or talk neuroscience in any degree, just shoot me a message on LinkedIn. You can find me at Amy Levine. I am friends with both Roland and JM, so it should be pretty easy to find. I do facilitate meetings within organizations as a coach and consultant. Right now, we're gearing up for annual planning. So if you are a leader or have need for a facilitator to drive the conversations around your team annual planning, I am here to help. I also am driving an individual annual planning meeting on September 16th. So if you're an individual, regardless of your goals, professional or personal, and you want a facilitated workshop with other like leaders in the tech industry. That will be on September 16th. More information will be shared in the coming weeks. So just send me a message and we will go from there.
And of course, you can get a lot of these things also by taking a look at the website for this particular episode. And that's a big pitch for whatsyourbaseline.com, where you can find all the things associated with today's conversation, some notes, some links, all the things we've talked about, and a wonderful conclusion for the things that Amy had brought to the table. Thank you again, Amy. This was a fantastic conversation. And like Roland, I feel like I've learned a lot after talking to you. This is something that doesn't get said enough in particularly in leadership spaces, but I'm excited to hear more about it. And that's also a pitch for people to hear more about things from us. So make sure to follow What's Your Baseline on LinkedIn. Let us know how you like the episode. So feedback, comments, email us at hello@whatsyourbaseline.com. And if you want to know about more from this specific episode, you can go to whatsyourbaseline.com/episode 73. But until that next time, friends, I've been J.M. Erlinson.
And Amy Levine.
And my name is Roland Wood.
And we will see you in the next one.